Thank you for joining us for Everything Under the Sun, the AccuWeather Podcast. I'm your host, meteorologist Regina Miller, joined in the studio by Andy Robb, my producer. And this week, Andy, we are talking about the Ironman competition.
That's right, the Ironman, like the name in triathlons, not just in the United States, but global.
Right. I can't imagine the extreme athleticism that it takes to complete one of these courses.
Just the training alone that goes into it, preparing in advance.
Right. Training, and also, you know what, is always a problem. So not only your physical condition, but the weather scenarios you may encounter during the Ironman competition.
Because you have athletes, they're not all in one place at once on a route. They could be one's over here, one's over here. Yeah.
They can be hundreds of miles apart because you got the swimming, you got the long-range bike race, the marathon. So we'll be talking to a few folks from the Ironman organization about weather safety and then how you plan for these events because they're taking place all year long globally. And we're also going to be joined in the studio by John Lundberg. He's a long-range meteorologist, but he has completed a couple of Ironman competitions.
That's right. He's going to join us to talk about his experience with the Ironman triathlon and how they all work together to keep people safe and stay ahead of the weather.
Right. That's all after this. Well, Andy and I are joined in the studio now by Joe Lundberg. He's been with us here before, and he has done the Ironman triathlon. He's a meteorologist here at AccuWeather. And we are joined on the phone now by Beth Atnip. She is the VP of Global Operations, and John Bertsch, he is the Director of Global Safety and Security, both for the Ironman Triathlon. So thanks, everyone, for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, I'm really interested in this, and I was actually talking to Joe before we even got started here on the show because it is amazing to me that all of this can happen in one day. But I kind of want to ask you, John, first to explain to me about the specifics of the Ironman triathlon, what it is, and how it all got started.
Certainly, yes. Thank you and good morning. Aloha. Ironman has been known to become more of an iconic brand, but the origins came back from 1977 when a group of individuals in Oahu were trying to determine what was the toughest sport, whether it was swimming, cycling, or running. And they decided to combine all three of the disciplines together and come up with what is now known as the Ironman triathlon. So in 1978, 15 competitors started what was the 2.4-mile Waikiki rough water swim, coupled with a 112-mile bike around Oahu, and then followed up by a 26.2-mile run, which was the Honolulu Marathon course. And they would compete with those three disciplines in a back-to-back scenario. So trying to compete and complete all three of the disciplines in one day. On February 18th, 1978, they did that race. Winner of that was Tom Warren in 11 hours and 15 minutes and 46 seconds, which was pretty spectacular. But the Lieutenant Commander Collins had said if you swim 2.4 miles, bike 112 miles, and run 26.2 miles, you can brag for the rest of your life that you're an Ironman. And so the enthusiasm and the legend was born of Ironman, and it continued on through currently, which we just experienced our 40th year anniversary.
Wow, that's amazing. So I know that it's widely considered the most difficult one-day sporting event in the world. And Joe, you have done this event.
I want
to ask you twice. That's amazing. So tell me about your experience doing it.
Well, the first one was not under the Ironman brand. It was in Penticton, British Columbia, after they had moved to Whistler. And I got invited up by a friend of mine who lived in Sydney, Vancouver, British Columbia. Said, hey, I'll train you if you come up here and do this event. So I said, sure, why not? And that was only going to be for the 70.3 for half an Ironman. And then I said, why don't you train me as if I'm going to do the full thing? So I went up and did it, and I managed to finish. Even though I wanted to quit on the run, I wanted to hand in my timing chip about halfway through, and I just kept saying, no, there's a couple of people in mind that have been rooting for me and training for me. I can't do it. If I walk to the finish line, I'll get there. And I did with an hour to spare. And then I enjoyed it enough that I said, I'm going to do this again. And so I went back to 2016 and did Whistler, and I was able to shave 45 minutes off my time, so about 15 hours and 15 minutes, something like that.
That is
Congratulations.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
great.
Now,
Something I never thought that I could do when I weighed 270 pounds a number of years ago.
now, Beth and John, did you guys ever do this? Just out of curiosity.
Yes, we have both done the Ironman triathlon, and I know, and John can speak for himself as well, that I have done 6 full distance Ironmans and endless 70.3s, and mostly did most of them prior to working full time for Ironman. But yeah, I started back in 2002 and came from a swimming background. And then John, you obviously, I'll let you speak kind of your background.
Yeah, Beth's a phenomenal athlete and looked up to. She actually, Beth, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you also coach some athletes as well?
I did. You're correct,
Yeah.
John. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Beth's a great athlete. Yes, I think all of us try to, when you work for the organization, it really gives us a different perspective if you go out and compete. And so in 2006, I competed in the World Championship here in Kona, and then have a number of 70.3s that I've raced in, most recently in 2017 here in Hawaii as well. And that's where I'm based. I'm in Hawaii.
Well, as one can imagine, there's all sorts of weather issues that you can face in a competition on a course that spans such a large coverage area of land and water. So tell me how you prepare for that, ahead of time, and then if you're running into weather events at the actual time of the event.
Let me jump in there real fast, because I think it's super important that we talk a little bit about the history and how AccuWeather became involved with the Ironman brand. Ironman has 300 events currently worldwide, and our portfolio of events includes not only triathlon, but also running events, including the Rock and Roll Marathon Series, and we're currently branching out to the Abbott World Marathon Majors. We also have mountain bike racing, adventure racing, and we're expanding very heavily in the China market. When we originally started looking at our risk factors and what could be our true potential, we decided that weather was going to be we didn't decide. Statistically, weather is probably our biggest risk. And so we knew we needed to close that gap and try to find a supplier that could help us with managing the weather portion of it, focusing on what they do best. And after looking around and talking to a number of different providers, we focused in on AccuWeather. We were very, very pleased and have been with AccuWeather and what they've been able to provide us. And I think both Beth and I, and that's the reason we're here on the podcast, because of the actionable intelligence that we receive from AccuWeather, that gives us the ability and our people on the ground to make valuable decisions, instant decisions that could have real world consequences on many people that are participating in our events.
And to kind of piggyback on what John said, so we at Ironman started using AccuWeather during the 2017 season. So this is, our third season of having AccuWeather as provider. And, we have events now with the acquisition of the Rock and Roll Marathon Series, when that happened back in 2017. Our North American calendar basically spans all year. So we have events in January, and our last event takes place in December. So we really don't have any down periods. And so when you look at all the weather possibilities in all the regions that we're operating in, week in and week out, we know weather is all, as John said, is going to be our greatest risk. And so when we added the AccuWeather technology, and it really provided our teams on the ground and our teams monitoring the events every weekend just to be in front of everything. And so, how we operate essentially is we have a person on the ground that's kind of what we call our lead guy, boots on the ground, and then we have a person from afar that's assisting with this, so that no matter what happens through a monitoring, if one person's busy, there's always 2 other people that we can get a hold of. So being in an outdoor venue, we have a couple of things leading up to the event. We have our expo and athlete registration where we're, majority of our events are outside. So we're dealing with tents and we're dealing with pop-up tents. And then you have the race day scenario. So being able to make decisions 30 minutes, and having that 30 minutes advance notice, and even knowing before then is so critical to what we do. And what makes, so some of the things that we do so difficult is, especially at the Ironman distance, the full distance, you could have athletes, still swimming while you have athletes on the bike that are spanned across, a 50-mile radius. On a 70.3, you could potentially have athletes in the swim, on the bike, and on the run. And so while this is different than a concert where you have a single venue, we have athletes that take 2,000 plus athletes that are around, 112 miles on the bike, and that's just the bike, and then you got to worry about another 26 on the run. And so it really, what AccuWeather has really provided us is visibility down to the mile, where weather is tracking. And we worked on this for a while, and we dialed in a process with AccuWeather, and it's been phenomenal. And we're able to prepare so far in advance to make these decisions. The last thing we want to do is be in a place where we have to cancel an event, but certainly athlete safety comes first. It's been a great process over the last 3 years. And we feel we've got a really dialed-in process now, and really don't see how we could operate without AccuWeather. It's been so great to have them. AccuWeather as a tool for us.
I know you just stated, Beth, that the safety of the participants is paramount. We as athletes, I'm speaking for myself in this case, we understand that what we're doing involves inherent risk. I mean, whether it's swimming in the water, waves, water temperatures, or riding out of the bike, whether you're dealing with heat and humidity, same thing on the run. There's, or just vehicles, on your path. There's
Right.
inherent risk on all these things. How do you guys strike that happy balance between the two, especially as it comes to weather?
Well, certainly when we're looking at new events in the first place, or just looking at where events take place, certainly we try to obviously have an event during a time of year that is more positive from a weather perspective. However, we do know that there's always a risk. Like for example, we were in Boulder this past weekend. There's usually storms that pop up all the time. It's normal protocol. So it's just, how do we deal with that? So what we do from an operational standpoint is, we know, since weather is always a potential, we have backup plans, and then backup plans are backup plans. So we deal with, we know we don't wait till the last minute to like, okay, what do we do if we cancel the swim? So we know we kind of have different variations that we go through. Do we have a shortened swim? And if we can't shorten it, we move to a canceled swim. And if we cancel the swim, we move to this and that. So having those plans in place and preparing for that, we get ahead of it so that if we do have a weather issue, we know how to act on it. In a best case scenario, we'll know the day before that we've got an issue, so that we can even plan more ahead. So like this past week, and I'll use an example at Ironman 70.3 Eagleman, there was a weather front the day before that was creating some issues on the swim, and we ended up not being able to host the swim or have the swim on race day. But because our guys knew about it and were aware of the situation, we were able to work ahead and get all our timelines aligned. Because as an athlete, and I can speak about this because I've been through it myself with the canceled swim at one of the events I've done, we just look to the organizers to give some direction and what do we do next. And so we have all that planned out, and we run every scenario. We run scenario where weather is in the morning before the swim. We run scenarios where it happens during the swim, during the bike, and the run.
So you have like mock trainings or something on how to prepare for it?
Well, the events where we have issues actually prepare every time something like that happens. It helps us the next time. But what we do is we have all the kind of pre-planned timelines in place. So, because basically when we're dealing with as many miles as we are on the road, you have to be off a road by X amount of time. So we'll run all the scenarios, and we'll know we'll have this much time to get all the athletes started. So we don't necessarily do mock scenarios, but we do have all timelines adjusted. And then what we do after an event where there's a weather situation, we will inform the other teams that weren't on site to let them know how we dealt with that, so that the next time another scenario comes around, we will be even more prepared to deal with it.
Oh, okay. So each time is a new learning experience.
Especially if you have a cancellation when an event is actively going on. Those are one of the more difficult ones to deal with, because you got to deal with timing situations. How do we give out awards? How do we give out world championship slots? there's a lot of other things that go on behind the scenes than just the, what you see swim, bike, run. So we use those learning experiences and make sure we talk about that on weekly calls.
Yeah, and part of it too is that the athletes, they've been in training and preparation for this. For some, it may be their first Ironman or 70.3, and they don't want to be disappointed to say, well, I trained all this training, and now you're canceling the swim or something like that. But you still have to consider what's most important in terms of safety for all of the participants, whether it's the first time or the person who's doing it for the 100th time.
And I'd like to redirect that a little bit, because no event, no venue, and no race on any given day is the same at any event. There are so many different variables, whether it is the temperature, hot or cold, wind, course changes at the last minute, whatever it could be. So every single event that we host, even though we try to replicate them, are still, without a doubt, an individual event amongst itself. And so our job as an event producer and event organizer is to try to make that event as challenging as possible so that the athletes that signed up for an Ironman are going to experience the difficulty, the competitiveness, excitement of crossing that finish line. But on the same regards, our responsibility as well is to try to make that venue and that race course as absolutely safe as possible. When we talk about learning experiences, we do after actions, and we talk to our guys, and we try to build upon the success of what went right and what went wrong.
And know that you're not going to please everybody with whatever decision that you make. It's just the nature of the game.
That's part of being a meteorologist, too.
Well, that's true. Yes, it is.
Yeah. So tell me about what are some of the most difficult scenarios that you guys have encountered maybe on the race day or the competition day? Because I know you had a few that we had talked about ahead of time in Florida and Galveston, for example. Can you tell me about those situations?
Yeah, and those were two different scenarios, but both where AccuWeather was tremendously helpful in making sure we executed our plan. So last year at the 2018 Ironman Florida, which actually was supposed to be in Panama City Beach, and we had to move it to Haines City, Florida, 6 weeks out due to Hurricane Michael. So but Haines City in itself is another one of our host cities. So we were familiar with the race, but we physically had to move a full distance Ironman in 6 weeks' time. So that was challenge number one. But once we got on site, there was actually this was on Friday night, so our expo was kind of coming to a close, but we still had we have a lot of activity. We were getting ready to have what we would call our welcome ceremony, where we, have run a show, we have videos, it's a celebration, it's to welcome our athletes, and, we had guys out on the water, and I noticed the front moving, and as it was moving, it was picking up speed, and it was picking up strength, and was essentially heading straight for a venue. We did not have the tornado warning in our city, but I don't know if it was even quite the next county over, but it was pretty darn close to our venue. They ended up having a tornado warning, and because we were able to track it, again, down to the mile, we were able to make all the calls to our staff. We actually shut down expo registration, made everyone leave, because, again, we're outside in tents. Definitely not where you want to be in the middle of a major thunderstorm. We had staff members out on the water. We got them off the water, and then, went through a whole 30-minute window of dropping all our tents down, putting extra sandbags on, doing everything we needed to do to get everyone inside safely before the big storm hit. Thankfully, as I said, we actually did not encounter a tornado in Haines City proper, but we used the information from AccuWeather to not only get our guys to safety, but we also made the call, knowing how the storm was tracking, to actually cancel the welcome ceremony that evening for the safety of everyone, and ended up rescheduling the next day. So that was kind of a pre-race scenario. And again, that worked out extremely well. We had great communication on the ground, and having a meteorologist on call 24/7 with the tracking is so important too, because I can just pick up the phone and talk it through them and kind of talk through what we think is going to happen. So fast forward to this year at 2019 Ironman 70.3 Texas in Galveston. Again, we knew the day ahead that we were probably going to have some weather fronts move through on race day. And, in order to get as many athletes the full experience, obviously we had everything kind of planned out. We had shelters located on the course, which is normal operating procedures. Again, you're dealing with an outdoor venue. It's extremely difficult to, first of all, athletes, they're out there for a purpose. They want to finish. They want to run through that finish line. So it's communicating to the athletes. It's getting them off the course and being able to do that in a quick enough time. So we made the call far enough out before the really heavy storm moved through. Again, we had athletes still out on the run. This is one of those scenarios where and I believe we were either getting the last few guys off the bike or had just finished the bike. But this is one of those scenarios where we ended up having to make the call to actually what we would call suspend the race, with only having just under 300 finishers crossing the finish line. And then ultimately we ended up canceling the event. And again, with the wind and the tremendous lightning, it was completely unsafe to have our athletes still out there competing. So we were able to implement our plans, which was having the pre-located gathering place and meeting space to get our athletes off the course. Those are scenarios you don't want to have, but as a event organizer, as John said, when you have 300 plus events, you're going to have at some point. And so, having making sure our athletes are safe, making sure the spectators are safe, and let's not forget about our volunteers as well. I mean, those are people that are out there helping us and helping those athletes achieve their goal of getting to the finish line. So we obviously safety first for the athletes, but it's everyone else that's out there working on the event. So, again, we were able to track the individual cells in the storms, and we knew when the storm was going to hit. And so, again, we're able to get ahead of it and not lose, a lot of equipment, and everyone was safe and sound. So those are kind of, some examples of what we deal with week in and week out.
Now, how do you let the athletes know, like mile by mile? Like, let's say you're in the midst of an event and something starts happening at that point in time. Like, you talked about out in Colorado. I mean, we know that can change on a dime. So how do you let them know?
Yeah, so again, part of the planning process is having a communication plan to the athletes. So we have various timing points, and where the shelters were along the run course, we secure a volunteer with a staff member to make sure that we direct the athletes off. So, as you can probably imagine, it's impossible to literally just, tell 2,000 people to get off the course in a 1 minute span, right? So it does take a few minutes, which is why you have to start the process early enough. So by the time that the heavy storm or the biggest threat comes in, everyone's off. So it's just finding the specific points what were predetermined and having staff members there to direct the athletes, answer questions, and have the volunteers there as well, because they will ask questions and they'll want to know what's going on, and they'll want to know what's going on 5 minutes later and 5 minutes later after that. So we, obviously with our race staff, have our radios and our communication tools that we use, but the staff members are really there in place to make sure those athletes do get off the course.
As an athlete, like, what are your biggest concerns as you prepare for the race? Like, how do you prepare? Like, what is some of the weather where you're like, oh, geez, we're going to have this or that,
The biggest concern would be thunderstorms. I mean, just lightning and doing in an outdoor venue just don't mix.
Because that'll be the thing that shuts down your
exactly.
events.
I mean, if it's rain, it's you just you slow down your speeds on the bike a little bit, but you can deal with that. You just have to be a little bit more safe. On cornering and braking and descents and stuff like that, and running. Most of us have run in the rain, so it's no big deal. But extreme cold would be another thing. You're exerting yourself like that, and you're sweating, and then you're trying to lose heat and try to make sure that you don't lose too much and all sorts of other bad things.
Right, because then if you get wet, like.
Yeah.
Or, if you're sweating and then you get wet, then you have to.
But thunderstorms to me would be the one thing that'd be most scary to me. I don't know about John or Beth, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, having now been an athlete and now working for Ironman, for me, it was more about the nutrition and how the nutrition ties into the weather. So, one of the more difficult things with weather is an event that may start out in the 30s, but by the run it's in the 70s or something like that, where there's a huge weather swing. And a lot of times heat is for an Ironman athlete that's out there for 15 plus hours. That's just planning and making sure you have everything kind of dialed in. But yeah, I would, again, thunderstorms and things like that, which are completely out of your control, right? So you focus on the things that you can control, making sure nutrition, I have the proper equipment and I have my sunscreen and whatever. But then it's knowing and understanding that the event organizer will kind of, what I say, have my back when it comes to, they'll make the decision for me, right? So if there's a situation where it's not safe, they're the ones expressing that. So, that's what we try to do, obviously at Ironman is use all the tools that we have. But I think, to make the best decisions for the athletes.
And what about like excessive heat? Like, so you said you, Beth, will adjust like your diet, like leading up to the day, or?
Yeah, it's more around the hydration and really sodium and potassium intake. I mean, there's you can get in a whole nother lecture on nutritional science, but I think it's just finding the right balance between too much fluid, not enough fluid, sodium intake. There's a reason why at our events, we have electrolyte drinks and water, and then in addition to that, we'll have some salty offerings on the run.
Chicken broth.
And chicken broth.
It's become my elixir.
Chicken broth is.
Gotta love chicken broth.
I do too. I now, at any kind of endurance event, I make sure I have it in one of my water bottles, because it is significantly cut down on cramping and has allowed me to go through without cramps on these long distance events.
It's being smart, listening to your body, but that's why, when the Ironman, for example, we have aid stations, every 10, roughly, I mean, it varies 10, 12 to 15 miles apart on the bike, and usually every mile or so on the run. And we have, when you look at our global calendar, we have events all over the place. Some are historically cooler, some are historically hotter. And athletes, we do the best we can to communicate that to the athletes and provide information so they can best be prepared. We have our race doctor that normally addresses the athlete and our athletes and talks them through kind of the best planning scenarios for them prior to race day.
Well, can I ask each of you, what was your worst weather situation that you had to deal with, specifically just getting through the competition? Like, what was one of the hardest things that you had to deal with? I'll start with you, Joe.
Heat.
Just the heat.
Heat and cramping.
Yeah.
When I did Ironman Whistler, I cramped up on the bike, climbing up those big hills from the Pemberton Flats up to Whistler Village, that's when the course was a few years ago. And I happened to stop at one point near the end of a climb and look down. There was a bottle of Gatorade lying in the sun, and I grabbed it and downed it.
It wasn't even yours.
It wasn't even mine, but it was there. God provided, and I took care of it, and my cramping went away, and I was able to finish, and then I was able to run, walk, and finish. But heat was the biggest.
That's called perseverance, Joe.
Exactly.
You do whatever you got to do.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure that you, John, and Beth too, understand that you don't panic. You think, okay, what do I do now? What's the next most?
Because I would totally panic.
Yeah.
Because I'm not that kind of athlete.
You don't want to do this.
I run a couple miles every other day just so I can eat donuts. So for me, I can't even imagine that is grueling, to be going through that. So for you, John, what would have been your most difficult?
I think to reflect on your question, it's actually finishing. When you pull into perspective the length of the race, we're on a full distance Ironman, you're traveling 140.6 miles, 2.4 on the swim, 112 on the bike, and running a marathon. And so you're out there from sunrise till a little after sunset, anywhere from 12 to 15 hours for some athletes. And so you're going to you might go through all different types of weather, from being cold in the morning, getting out of the swim, to rainstorms, to extreme heat and sun, and then cloud cover and possibly a thunderstorm while you're on the run. For me, when I raced in 06, it was a beautiful day. We had great, Hawaii, everything's sunny and 80 degrees. But that evening enrolled a massive tropical storm with some serious downpours, so much so that at one point they were actually talking about canceling or redirecting the finish line because the finish line was flooded. So when I ran across the finish line, I was in knee-deep water as we came around. But that was, I'll tell you, when you can see the finish line, and after a full day like that, knee-deep water is nothing. You're gonna cross that finish line.
You're just getting another swim. You just did an additional swim, is what it is.
Exactly.
And how about you, Beth? Do you have a specific situation where it was just like well, I know the whole thing is grueling, but any specific situation where you look back and you're like, wow, I just can't believe I went through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to all my Ironman and 70.3 experiences. There was one event that was in the middle of July. It was hot. I mean, it wasn't the worst. I mean, because obviously Ironman Hawaii, and I had done that before. That was in the mid 90s, but has a pretty nice breeze when you're out there. But there was another event, and it was a half Ironman, but I came out of the swimming. My body just could not get it to cool down. And so from the swim on, I mean, I was in the hurt locker, and I had everything dialed in. I just couldn't figure out what was going wrong, and I'm one of those athletes that recognizes when it's time to stop, but at the same time, I wanted to still continue. So I just had to, what I would call, shut it down, meaning just I really had to slow down. And I remember the last 6 miles of that half Ironman run, and it was completely miserable. And I finished, and it still took me a while to recover. So again, it wasn't necessarily the hottest I've ever trained in, but and actually on that particular day, they actually shortened the bike due to the heat. So it was a significantly hot day. And again, that's another example of what we have done and sometimes have to do. But again, when you get to a certain point and you cannot get cooled down. So I think that was kind of, I think it's hard sometimes for athletes to have that inner voice say, okay, you gotta slow down. It's not worth it. So as a coach and an athlete, I just took my own best feedback and learning tools and just said, okay, that's enough.
Right.
So I was okay walking that day. I was okay.
Yeah. As long as you were finishing it. And how long are you guys down for afterwards? Because I can't imagine that you do anything the next day.
You eat a lot the next day.
Do you?
Oh my gosh, yes.
You can binge watch TV and just eat whatever you want.
The stories that I have from eating the day after and from the friends that I know who've done it. Oh, you just don't want to get around us. Just don't get in the way of food.
Right. It's like starving. So, well, I appreciate talking to you guys. Now, I just wondered if someone wants to know where and when some of the upcoming events are. Do you have some of those that you can mention?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the easiest thing to do is just go to Ironman.com and you can click on our events pages, and we have their events broken out by region. So even if there's people that are interested in international races, for example, this past weekend we had 8 events. We've got 4 global events this weekend. So, this particular weekend coming up, we don't have any events in North America, but as John said, in any given weekend, we've got running, we've got mountain biking, we've got triathlon, we've got it all. So I think Ironman.com and then going to the specific region that you're looking for is probably the best way to go for someone looking for their first event, or if they've done, events before.
Well, maybe you'll see Joe at one of those.
I plan on doing more. Yes, I'm crazy, but I love it. I love it. I love it. I do. I just it's one thing I've discovered is I like endurance events.
Yeah, once it gets under your skin, it's hard to get out.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know. Maybe I'll try it one of these days. I'm not promising anything, but maybe.
I'll help you get there.
Okay. Thanks so much for talking to us. Really appreciate it, you guys.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us.
Great.
It's absolutely amazing. All the amount of work that these athletes do, that's really impressive, but also all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes to make all these events happen. So, big thanks to Ironman for joining us.
Right, and thank you for joining us. Tune in next week for an all-new AccuWeather podcast.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Be sure to subscribe to AccuWeather's Everything Under the Sun, giving you the stories behind the weather and so much more. New episodes every Thursday. Just search for AccuWeather on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or visit AccuWeather.com/podcast.